And we are live. Hello, everyone. This is your right geek, honorary man king, and leader of the Awkward Cough Squad here with number one Marmaduke fan to discuss the novel Fahrenheit 451. I decided to start this series pretty much because I feel like at the moment we're living in at least the prequel of a dystopian novel. So I thought it would be interesting and fun and educational to look at some of the most famous dystopian novels that have been written in the last century and talk about how they may or may not apply to our current situation right now, and what are some of the things we can learn from those early warnings that these authors wrote for us. Because these dystopian novels are meant to be warnings, not instruction manuals. Number one Marmaduke fan, welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome.
I have a non Fahrenheit 451 related Ray Bradbury story. My art teacher was a big Ray Bradbury fan, so she would play interviews with Ray Bradbury in class, and we'd draw to them. And he has this absolutely fantastic interview. I think it's like for some kind of like library YouTube channel. If you just search Ray Bradbury library, it comes right up, where he basically makes the point that if you have access to a library, doesn't matter how poor you are, you have access basically to a free education. So I've always really appreciated Ray Bradbury as kind of an artist who points artists in the direction of like reading as the key to unlocking yourself as an artist. So it was nice to revisit Fahrenheit 451 for this discussion.
Right. Because one of his, and one of Bradbury's primary messages in this book is that reading does enrich you as a human being. And when you deny yourself of that, activity, that intellectual activity, as a person, you become less. You become more attenuated as a human being. You become less deep, let's say, and less happy because you haven't had that congress with people who live in your time and also have lived before you. And that is why he opposed so vigorously any attempts to censor or to alter works to fit whatever the current zeitgeist demanded. And the other thing about Fahrenheit 451 is it's not just most of the time when kids read it in high school, what our teachers tell us is this is a book about censorship, and it is that to some extent, but it is also crucially it's a book about how the popular media also impacts how we think in very much a negative way. That his message here was that commercial TV and that kind of popular media was also kind of filling your head with a lot of emptiness and distracting you from what was really going on in the world. So we had that message in the book as well. All right,
it's kind of a prototype of consume product memes. Like the movie They Live was originally meant as a criticism of the Reagan administration, and now it's kind of become a meme for the populist right, where they post obey, consume, obey, right. I think the right has picked up on, like, the right's normally very capitalist. I want people to have the freedom to consume products, but I think the right has picked up on how consuming can become a sort of idol or something that pacifies you. Disney, Star Wars, Hogwarts. Like, when you start letting these popular Hollywood franchises basically do your thinking for you.
Correct. Yeah. So, I think that the fact that the right has picked up on that, it's actually a positive development for the right, because I've been a conservative at least basically my whole adult life, and one thing that I always thought was I looked at capitalism the same way I looked at science. They were processes. They were excellent processes to achieve practical ends. So you had with science is a process. It's a process of checking and falsifying theories, looking for the data, the empirical evidence for particular theories and making sure that they are true. That process is an excellent process, but it's supposed to be that process is supposed to exist in a philosophical context that tells us what we do with the information that we find from that process. In similar fashion, capitalism is an excellent process to get products to market that people want to buy. And it's an excellent process for lifting people out of poverty. But once again, capitalism is supposed to exist in a philosophical context in which we understand how do we use this process for the betterment of people. There has to be like an end goal in mind. And the one flaw of capitalism, if it's running unfettered without that end goal, is it does turn into exactly what the memes, what we've been saying through the memes: consume, obey, instead of really thinking, how do we use this very excellent, foolproof process to get product to people who need the product? How do we use that to actually achieve the goal of the betterment of people, right?
Material stuff and toys become the end of life.
Right. Instead of saying this material stuff, we need that in order to achieve this higher end of life that we're looking for. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that Bradbury as an author wanted us to think about, is to think beyond the act of consuming to what actually is the purpose. What is the purpose of a human being? What is our higher end? And how do we use these processes in order to reach that higher end?
It's also interesting that he identifies the source of censorship as special interest groups, like even before government. All of the big dystopias have kind of like a haunting or a horror idea to them. And in the other two famous ones, like 1984 and Brave New World, I feel like the horrible idea in those is it could be possible for a tyrannical government to have perfect control so that you can never rebel. And I feel like the scary idea in Fahrenheit 451 is more, what if people just wanted to be stupid? We didn't even need the government to oppress us anymore. It kind of like plays off this thing like, is it bad leaders who lead the people to do bad things, or is it bad people who elect bad leaders? And Fahrenheit 451 is kind of presenting this idea that we could start oppressing ourselves without any help from a tyrannical overlord or the government.
Right. And in a way, that's why I decided to lead with this one in this series that I'm trying to put together on dystopian novels, is that Bradbury remarkably anticipated almost 60 years prior our present situation, in which it really isn't the government that is putting the boot on our neck. It's private entities that are doing so, and they're doing so at the command of a large segment of the populace. That's why in the description of the stream, I asked the question, is Fahrenheit 451 coming true? To a certain extent, I believe that it is coming true, that there is a significant proportion of our population here in the United States and in the Western world in general that really wants to make Fahrenheit 451 a reality, that they want to, as the line in the book says, they want to remove all offense from literature until all you have is this generic bland tapioca, right? I think that that is what's literally happening right this second. So that's why I chose this novel to start with.
And they had to, people stopped reading books and started reading horrible things like smut magazines and comic books, for morons who can't read. That's who comic books are for.
Yeah.
one of the things I thought of is kind of one of the things I appreciate about Fahrenheit 451 is I think it's one of these books that is kind of stamped onto people's minds that book burning is bad. Comic book burning was a thing. Burning Harry Potter books was a thing in some places in the 90s. I think there are a lot of people who would be burning books if they didn't kind of know, gee, if someone takes a photo of me burning books, I will look like a bad guy or a bad person. There was a little discussion about this when destroying Confederate statues was a thing, where like my point would be, I kind of don't care about the morality of a Confederate statue or even the quality of a Confederate statue. When you're destroying some kind of work of art, you're doing something that's directly parallel to destroying a book. In a way, destroying the art might be worse, because if you destroy a book, hopefully there are other copies of that book. If you're destroying a work of art, there's generally only one or a very small number of copies of that work of art. Right. Kind of like the statement of burning a book is, if I had my way, if I were the tyrant, I don't think this book should exist. And when an artist like Bradbury kind of like takes that idea and takes it to its logical conclusion, what if there was a society that's basically formed on the idea of burning books? I guess his point is that you kind of make a hell for yourself in trying to escape difficult ideas or difficult feelings. You don't stop those painful feelings. You just stop people from having any kind of place to express those feelings. And then the entertainment and the drugs come in as a way of numbing the reality that you don't have any purpose to your life.
Right. And so you have early in the novel, when Montag comes home and realizes that his wife has taken her entire bottle of sleeping pills. And the impression that you get in the narrative is that like she wasn't even aware that she was doing it. Like she was so distracted by the seashell in her ear that she just kept taking the pills, just kept taking the pills, just kept taking the pills until she had taken the whole bottle. And apparently, this is something that happened in the society enough that they had they didn't even send a straight up ambulance to take you to the hospital anymore. They had people that they had dedicated to, pumping out people's stomachs who had accidentally done that because they were so distracted by the media in their ear that they didn't even realize that they had done that. Which is, that's it's very disturbing. And Bradbury has a way of words that the way he describes this, where the two men that come in to pump Mildred's stomach, like how cavalier and matter of fact they are. Oh, we just did, we do a bunch of these all the time. It's no big deal. And it's like, and it's really creepy how that whole scene is described. And the fact that like Montag and Mildred are supposed to be married to each other, but they basically have zero feelings for each other whatsoever. Yeah, they're basically just living in the same house, but have no personal connection because of the omnipresence of the media in their life.
It kind of since I'd be positive that Ray Bradbury read 1984, and I think he was a good chunk younger than that older generation. So it was kind of like maybe like a boomer continuing a tradition started by, Silent Generation or Greatest Generation writers. There's a neat parallel, I think, between Winston in 1984 is in a loveless marriage, and then he falls in love with I don't remember her name in 1984, but both Winston and Guy Montag are in these loveless marriages. But for Winston, it's a little bit more of just like a state expectation that you get married. And for Guy Montag, he presumably met her at some point. He presumably had some kind of connection with her at some point. It's more like the entertainment side of things is what's deadening them, rather than just like the oppressive state. But both of them are also in societies where you're encouraged to snitch on people. There's snitching on people who have books, and there's snitching in the 1984. So there are lots of there are obviously lots of parallels, but you can tell that I think Ray Bradbury did want to separate himself from what 1984, like if 1984 is a bit more of a steamy, sexy romance, then Guy Montag's relationship with Clarice is a lot more platonic. He's older than Clarice. It's almost like, it's not like he falls in love with Clarice. It's more like just Clarice points out to him or becomes like a mirror that shows him that he's sad about something and he doesn't have the words or the language to explain why yet.
Right. Yeah. Basically, he's the one that awakens him to, or she's the one that awakens him to the fact that there's something in his life that's missing. And so she becomes, not a loved object necessarily, but just an object of fascination. Here is a person that is so different from all of the other people I know in this society. What is it that makes her different? What does she have that I'm missing, that my wife is missing, that all of my neighbors are missing? And he latches on to that.
Maybe another connection I'm thinking about is Brave New World has this theme where they genetically program people to go watch country sports, but they don't want them to enjoy flowers, because they found out that if people enjoy flowers, then that messes up some of their other programs. So they make people hate the country, but want to go to the country just to spend money watching country sports. So in Aldous Huxley, there's this idea that liking nature and appreciating nature is dangerous for the totalitarian state. Right. And in Fahrenheit 451, taking walks is a sign that you are antisocial.
You're weird somewhere. Yeah. You're weird somehow if you're out on your own. And that's and they use that at the end too, when Montag manages to slip from their grasp, so they have to find another scapegoat. The state has to find another scapegoat. They grab someone else who's out on a walk, because clearly, he's probably guilty of something.
Yeah,
he's out walking by himself. What kind of a person is he?
Yep. Any thoughts on the technology itself? Because like one of the fun things is always, when is it like a hokey? My favorite is like blocky cell phones in movies that are supposed to be set in the distant future, right? So there's some interesting things, like it has like spider-like robots, which are a little bit like some of these like MIT robots, where they're programming them to actually be able to balance, which is kind of one of the hard things for robots, is they don't know what their surroundings are. I kind of had the thought that the radio earplugs are maybe a precursor of AirPods. Maybe the wall-sized TVs, maybe kind of a precursor of virtual reality, or maybe even a precursor of video games, where you actually get to interact with the TV shows and be part of the TV show.
Right. Yeah.
I love it when like an author kind of predicts something, but not 100%. Like they knew something like it was coming. They just weren't sure exactly what form it would take.
Yeah. Well, and you can say like the whole premise of burning books to keep people from reading them. We have reached a stage right now where, as you say, people see the actual literal burning of a book as, oh my God, you're a Nazi. But people don't even have to do that anymore in order to get rid of a book, right? All you can do is you can just unpublish. Yeah, you can just unpublish it, right? So we've had many controversies in recent years in which an author who was going to have a book published in an upcoming month, that author would run afoul of some social justice warrior reviewer who would lambaste the book for how racist, sexist, homophobic, blah, 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 blah the book is. And then there'd be such a hue and cry that suddenly that author would find themselves without a publisher. And the publisher would essentially agree to pulp the run, right? So it doesn't have anything to do. You don't have to actually take a match to a book. We're an advanced enough society technologically that no burning required. You can just unpublish it. You can just remove someone's social media presence, and there you go. You've gotten rid of the evil influence that you're trying to get rid of. So he was unable to foresee. He was unable to foresee exactly how advanced we could get with our censorship efforts. But I do think that he is remarkable in that he was able to foresee that it would be a grassroots demand, not something that would come from the state.
Yeah, he understands the internal reasoning for it. And if you get the internal reasoning, it's sort of like the technology side of dystopia is less important. What makes it feel real is the human drama side of that. And I guess like goofy technology stats adds some charm to it in later years when I look back on it. But maybe for example, Captain Beatty. What's strange about Captain Beatty is he does read. He knows a lot of literature. But sort of like all that has done is sort of recommitted him in his desire to kill literature. So if there are useful idiots who just are completely oblivious to why would anyone want to read a book, Beatty understands books, but still wants to burn them, maybe out of self-hatred. He's a very complex character. Like Bradbury never like comes out and tells you exactly what it is about Beatty. Maybe Beatty wants to die. Maybe Beatty he's gotten just a little taste of what books have to offer, and since he can't have it, maybe he commits himself to being evil. I'd say Beatty, if Mildred is more like a consume product type, obsessed with the Marvel movies and only watches the Marvel movies, then Beatty's a little bit more of the malicious person who knows that censorship is wrong but needs to do it anyway, but maybe to fix some hatred in themselves.
Right. I think that he is supposed to represent the committed ideologue who, as you say, he understands exactly what he is destroying because he has clearly read some books. But because those books don't line up with the type of world and type of society that he wants to create, then he is consciously and deliberately destroying those things that are getting in his way. And there are many more useful idiots and consume obey types than there are those actual deliberate malicious types, but they do exist, and they're the ones that are kind of leading the charge.
I think it also creates this interesting triangle where there's kind of a Montag, Faber, Beatty triangle, where Montag wants these books, but he's not quite sure how to read them or what he's supposed to get out of books when he starts collecting them. Faber understands literature, but he maybe kind of like lacks the courage or conviction to do something about it. He feels trapped by the dystopia. And Beatty also understands literature, but is committed to destroying it. So Montag kind of becomes, he's not even like the literate guy yet. Just the fact that he wants to become a literate guy pushes Montag forward until he actually can do something, which is genuinely an act of rebellion. He ends up being the person who memorizes the book of Ecclesiastes, which is a neat choice because Ecclesiastes very much has like a theme of how everything is vanity and money is vanity and wisdom is vanity. So it's a book that really connects with his problem throughout the book. Is he's sad and he doesn't know why. And then it ends up basically being an avatar or a protector for a future generation. It's sort of like we're going to go through a dark age again, and in a dark age, we like to think we're so much more sophisticated than people in the dark ages. But somebody had to copy whole libraries, basically spend their whole life doing that by candlelight and bending over a little wooden desk. They never knew what they were going to get out of it. It was just their little job in the scriptorium.
Well, prior to the age prior to any supposed Renaissance is always a lot more active intellectually, artistically, and socially than it is often given credit for. So
it's kind of like it.
Yeah.
Well,
So
what I like about the Renaissance is it's sort of like I think a Renaissance clicks into place when some technology lets it start clicking into place. Like the printing press lets middle class people buy books. The internet,
yes,
basically lets everybody read almost every good book in existence for a very minor little, Wi-Fi fee, whatever it may be, right? And then the time before that is kind of like, let's preserve the stuff so that it doesn't get burned by the hordes of barbarians. So if censorship keeps getting worse and worse, physical backups are going to become more and more important. If Disney, tweaks all the movies on its streaming service to remove anything offensive from the history and just pretend like it never existed. What's funny is the pretense can be, oh, we're saving people from being offended by a racist past, but surprise, surprise, it also protects Disney from having anybody discover that.
Yeah, it also ends up hiding their racist past. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, it's interesting how convenient that is. That if we erase those offensive scenes from the movies, so that they effectively don't exist in the minds of future generations, then we can get away with the fact that in a different time we, did things and said things that are now considered to be racist or inappropriate.
I really
How
like
convenient
Warner Brothers.
that is.
When Warner Brothers was releasing Looney Tunes on DVD, right, they were obviously going to run into this problem. So they just put a little notice at the front that said, look, this doesn't represent what we believe as a company. Now, we will believe it was wrong to draw different races this way, but it's not our job to erase this history. So we're going to, that's it. Yeah. Like if this would bug you, we're going to let you know that this could be a problem for you. We're going to give you the warning, but we're going to publish the stuff. And I think Jordan Peterson has made the point that classical liberals, like maybe not the political ideology, but the people who have a liberal attitude want openness. They want a free flow of information, which is something I want, because if you believe in the truth, you hope that the truth will out if you let people know what the heck is going on. And the control freak side of that always has to point to something inappropriate. If we let you use this platform, Nazis will use this platform. If we let them publish this cartoon, people will think racist caricatures are okay. And it really is, I think, the division of, do you trust people to be adults or not in how they consume and think about media?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, it's funny that we're talking about this, because I was just reading the other day. I cracked open one of the things that I bought in Marvel's year-end sale. Towards the end of the year, towards the end of 2020, they had the sale on Comixology where it was the Marvel Masterworks sale, and they were selling like these Marvel Masterworks digitally for $1.99 a pop, So I bought a whole bunch of them, and I bought the old collections of the Golden Age stuff, and like the Atlas era before the Silver Age and stuff like that, because I wanted to grab some of the really, really old like Captain America stuff. And I was reading one of those the other day, and there was this little Captain America story that took place on an island in the South Pacific. And the entire story, I was really cringing, because I was like, oh man, this would be perceived as so racist today. Like, but I'm like, but at the same time, I was thinking, I wonder if Marvel's going to look back at that and be like, yeah, we're going to erase this from the record, just pretend that it didn't exist. In the same way that Disney is doing with some of its less than stellar history. Yeah, but I always think that what you're saying, the Warner Brothers method of not erasing it, because erasing it basically, if you're erasing it, you're not actually holding yourself accountable for anything that happened historically. But the other thing is, erasing things also denies you the opportunity to interact with older products that it may have those questionable things that we no longer accept today, but there might also be things that that we need in those older works. So taking them off the table is not the way to go. The way to go is to contextualize, to say, look, this was written in, in 1941, during a time that we were about to be at war with Japan. Like, so of course, Japanese people are going to be portrayed in a particular way. Like, but and that is no longer acceptable today. But this is the context, and obviously, we don't believe these things today. But keep in mind the context.
Weird thing where popular shows by South Park and Family Guy frequently use racial humor, where part of the point is we're going to do the most provocative thing we can possibly think of, and this gets brought up a lot. But why, like, if you were kind of raised in a sheltered household, you probably weren't watching a lot of South Park and a lot of Family Guy, but a lot of kids would watch those shows as sort of a guilty pleasure, maybe sneak it, try to hide the fact you were watching it from mom and dad. So how is it that we can have a culture where lots of people find that funny and get the humor of the situation, and then intellectually say, but it's racist if anyone else it does it? I feel like it ends up being like a kind of elitism where, there are a couple comedians will let get away with that, but we definitely won't let like some moron with an anime profile pic on Twitter get away with telling almost the exact same kind of joke. It doesn't feel like we have a stand. Well, it's feelings. If you feel offended, the feeling of offense doesn't care if there's a rational basis or some law that will consistently apply that. You're reacting based on feeling.
Right. And context often is not applied at all. Or context is basically completely ignored. So when you talk about things like South Park or Family Guy, like the South Park guys, when they use racial humor, I don't think that they are doing so because they are racist. I think they're doing so in order to point out how stupid racism is, and isn't it funny? Like, so like there's racial humor can be used in order to point out that racism is stupid, but people will often miss that context, or they will deliberately ignore that context in order to decry the racial joke that was told. So it's about removing from context. It's about trusting your feelings instead of approaching things as adults and approaching things as rational people. And that those internals are the things that Ray Bradbury is focused on in his novel. How his kind of perception of how a censorious regime would rise up, and he sees it coming up from below because he knows that, or he perceives correctly, or he intuits correctly that that the interest groups in society are not going to stand for offense of any kind, and that this would lead to the gradual destruction of any kind of free expression or free artistic creation.
I'm thinking about maybe like one controversial. I'm thinking about throwing out a controversial opinion just to throw it out, but there's a little bit of a boomer element to 451, where he's looking at television, he's looking at violence media, and kind of saying kids these days in their violent television program shortening their attention spans, right? So you can hear it in kind of like the baby boomer critique of modern media. But then in addition to that, I think Bradbury also has this very haunting description of a meaningless life where you don't even know why your life is meaningless. And I think there are points where, he's talking with Faber, and Faber makes the point that it's not that the books are magic and books are going to make your life better. What's important is the meaning in the books. You could have that meaning in radio, or you could have that meaning in television. But once they got rid of the books, then they had to get rid of the meaning as well, because if you put the meaning in a TV program, that would create the same problem the books were making. If you put that meaning in the radio program, that would create the same problem. So it starts out with the controversial feelings the books make, and then it has to extend to all the arts. You start with the high literature, and then you go into the low literature.
Correct. Right. And that's kind of, like, I could be wrong with how I understand history, but that is kind of how it went. Right. So we have the kind of politicization and purification of the arts did start with the high and is now reaching down into the popular. So, Marm, you're more of an art history expert than I am, but would you agree with that kind of general assessment of how the history went?
Yeah. So, one of the problem is like the modernist or the postmodernist, right? It's like the modernist would say we've moved past the classics in art because we have this intellectual, idea of a logical art, an art stripped of any content except sort of pure abstract ideas of beauty in and of themselves. Like, you don't need it to be an image of the Virgin Mary. Color and shape and form, all of these things create beauty without the baggage of the narrative content. And then I think postmodernism sort of kicks over the door and, it puts like a mustache on the Mona Lisa and does a fart joke, right? Like, postmodernism is an irreverent response to this sort of stuffy, elitist, intellectual movement, and then they ironically become the stuffy intellectual elite. That's one of the reasons I actually kind of like some postmodern art. Is I get the joke, and the joke is actually funny. Like when Duchamp puts a urinal in an art gallery as a joke, that's actually a very funny joke. But then when the 100th person does it, it's not funny anymore. You're not being creative or risky or irreverent. Now you're relying on the institutions to support you in making your irreverent point. And when I would have like art students who would know this, they would know that it was all kind of a pointless joke. They know it had all been done before, and it was basically more about, well, that's just the culture here, and if we as a culture decide we can be ironic about the conceptual artworks we make, why not? Like, we don't even have to show up at the student gallery, because that itself could be a statement on student galleries as performative works of art. So if I'm supposed to show up to the student show, I will choose not to show up as the student show, and my act of not showing up at the student show will be the work of art. That kind of thing. Like, every art student has like that absurd someone brought in a blank sheet of paper story. We all kind of know. It's almost like a running joke where that just means that you didn't do the homework.
Someone taped the banana to the wall. Yeah.
Right.
Someone taped a banana to the wall. Yeah.
I've been thinking about this a lot, because like, what do you do after that? I think you're the one who kind of pointed me in the direction of like a movement of painters who were trying to make a movement of art after postmodernism, because it's sort of like after postmodernism, if you attempt to make any movement, they'll just come in and critique it. And maybe this kind of like parallels what happens to internet movements. Internet movements get upset about something, they get outraged, and they decide they're going to stand up for it and for themselves and create something different. But then infighting happens and they end up splitting and fighting with each other over like the definitions of who gets to be in the movement or what it's. This happened to Wall Street Bets in like the course of a week. Is Wall Street Bets got skyrocketed in popularity. Lots of people joined Wall Street Bets who probably had absolutely no familiarity with the culture of Wall Street Bets before they became super popular. And then a civil war happened over, well, is silver a good investment for a Wall Street bet supporter? No, you guys are shills of the banks. Oh yeah, well, you guys are shills of the hedge funds. Like internet movements, I think lack the ability to, they lack a worldview. And since an internet movement doesn't have a worldview, there's never going to be like some little split over here and split over there. I don't know. So we're getting a little off. I've gone a little tangenty off of Fahrenheit 451. It's kind of interesting how there actually is a unified effort in Fahrenheit 451, but they're separate from society. It's a little bit more like the Benedict option. They're just preserving culture outside of the city in the countryside, where basically the city's given up on bothering to police them. The government in Fahrenheit 451 is a little bit more incompetent. Like they're not competent enough to universally enforce their rules. So they just are satisfied with policing behavior in the cities. But if you can get out of the city, you're basically scot-free at that point.
Right. Which, and it's interesting how that kind of anticipates what we're seeing now with the urban-rural divide, at least in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And that is leading to, in some sense, that's leading to a lot of the political division, and people are self-segregating too. Like, there's a reason that I'm now living in a rural location, and that's because my family has chosen that location for very distinct reasons that are, in some sense, in some ways, ideological. That we don't like the environment of more urban areas. We don't like what is popular in those areas. We want to live somewhere we can be free of all that.
Where you actually have nature.
That as well.
In a suburb or in the suburbs or in the rural area, you can actually see some nature. Part of me wonders, like, why would it be that way? Like, the city is kind of cool because you can be a capitalist, you can rise to the ranks of these big, exciting corporations and all these smart people. But we've set it up in such a way that to put yourself into that structure, you have to take yourself out of like a really beautiful structure. Like, who wants to die with a bunch of cold buildings surrounding them? People living in the cities, a lot of them dream of retiring to the country. Mm-hmm. So really their time in the city is just a way of getting enough money to escape the cities again. I don't know. It's such a recurring motif in the arts too. It's like something about city life is changing who we are as a people. But it's not entirely bad, because a city can also be an adventurous place. And I like the idea of people being able to go on adventures and, take some risks. It's just strange. Like, Tolkien gets at this, where basically Sauron and Saruman are technology and the future. Maybe these tools and these technologies are going to change us so much that we won't know how to control the toys anymore.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think Bradbury comes from kind of the same ethos as Tolkien, in a sense. He does have, as you say, the kind of the boomer attitude of kids today and their new media technologies. But I think that, as boomerish as that is, I think that there's also something valuable that we who are younger can learn from that, because there is a certain aspect in our popular media that is addictive, that hits that dopamine button and keeps us coming back for more, that can, in fact, attenuate our lives quite significantly. Can, in fact, turn our sources. Go ahead.
It's whether you can articulate the need. So if you say video games are bad, like, okay, boomer, but if you say this video game is bad because you're so obsessed with it, you don't do anything else with your life, then it's like, oh yeah, that's specific. I see what you're saying. I'm spending so much time doing default dancing in Fortnite. You know, Zoomers these days and their awful Fortnite video games. Why can't they have video games like I had in the 90s, right? But if you can articulate what
Mario Kart.
Right. If you can articulate what the human need is, like companionship. So if video games are a avenue towards companionship, that's good. If video games are an avenue towards loneliness and isolation, then maybe you do need to listen to, maybe the boomers have a point and you should cut some of that out of your life. You only get one life. A video game or a movie can add some pleasure and enjoyment to your life. Maybe it can even expand your horizons a little bit, but the thing itself isn't the end goal of life, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And if you're numbing yourself, you're not in a position to know if you're just numbing yourself with it, you're not in a position to spot how it's affecting you. You probably need like a third person or a third party to kind of like wake you out of that, which is what happens to Montag. Clearly shakes him out of his default, I like watching things go on fire, they make pretty lights mentality.
Right. Yeah, and so you have in the novel Mildred with her 3 walls, and she wants the 4th wall, just so she can be enclosed in the media. The problem with that is not so much that it's not kids today and their TV. I think that Bradbury does articulate the problem is that she is so focused on these para relationships with the people in the TV that she has completely lost contact with the people who are physically in her house. and that's the real issue, not so much the TV necessarily, but the fact that it has become all consuming that she has basically lost her ability to have any kind of human connection with the person who is supposedly married to her.
They sleep in separate beds, kind of like this idea that
they even sleep in separate beds. Yeah,
a sexless world, a childless world is an adventureless world, and the justification is always, well, kids would distract me from doing these things I want to do, but kids are an adventure. Like they're going to push your buttons. Yeah. They're not going to behave like a Netflix show behaves.
Earlier, my brain came up with a short Bradbury story. I don't know if you had to read this in high school at all. It was called The VELT. And basically the premise was the kids essentially had like a full-on virtual reality situation in their nursery that the parents allowed them to have. And the story eventually ends with the lions in this savannah that the kids had created in the virtual reality scenario. The lions end up killing the parents, I think, if I'm remembering the story correctly. And so that was another kind of boomerish sort of kids today and their TV. Oh, it's going to corrupt them and make them murderous. But I think the issue in that was not so much that the kids had the TV, but the parents were allowing that TV to become the babysitter of the kids instead of using it in moderation as it is meant to be used.
Well, and what if we build anything that we don't know how to control once we build it? So maybe like one of the arguments for why we should be happy about AI is because the AI has to obey its programmer. If the programmer doesn't tell the AI to kill us all, then the AI is not going to be able to kill us all, right? But if the AI or if the algorithm is so complicated that no one person can understand it, how are we going to, like, this is like a computer programming question I don't know the answer to. Like, is it possible to have a computer program think for itself to the point that it'll start operating independently from what we want it to do? And that's like a classic, Skynet in the Terminator is that they turn on Skynet 15 minutes after they turn on Skynet in 2015. It immediately starts, it immediately killing people. We have the potential to build things that can kill us and not even realize right away how good these things are going to be at killing us. A lot of warfare was based on building a tool that was better at killing your opponent, that was better than let's build armor to protect ourselves. Okay, let's build cannons and catapults to kill people in armor. And sometimes it takes us like 100 years to realize, oh, wait a second, we should not keep running at the other guys he mows us down. We got to build trenches and just hide from the machine gun fire, right? Civil War, one of the reasons the Civil War had such high casualties is we had artillery, and military minds hadn't come up with strategies yet to deal with the devastation of artillery. So they were just these big wars of attrition where you'd win by hopefully killing 100,000 of your opponents to their 50,000 of yours. So like the boomers may have a point. Like we kids these days, the machines might kill us.
Yeah, which and that kind of brings us to a more general theme of Fahrenheit 451, or what it is that Bradbury is trying to tell us is that people before us have valuable things to say to us, which is why the books matter. Right. So these books might contain things that to our modern day sensibilities are offensive or uncomfortable. But if we basically declare ourselves superior, and say that there's nothing in those books that contain offensive things, there's nothing in them that would actually be of value to us, then in a sense we are denying ourselves something pretty critical, because maybe today we have more wisdom when it comes about the issue of race, let's say, for example, but that doesn't mean that we are more wise about everything in existence. And that's why it matters. That's why books matter, why they shouldn't be erased, and why we need to train in our education systems. We need to train people to be able to grapple with those works that have uncomfortable aspects to them, so that we can also glean from those works what may in fact be valuable. What are some things that maybe we are less wise about? Because history is not, the progressives have this idea that history is this unidirectional arrow going up, up, up. And that's not actually how history has gone. So while we may think that we are the pinnacle of human achievement and wisdom, that may in fact not be the case. And assuming that we are, and thereby banishing every iteration that came before to the dustbin, or they're garbage people, so there's no need to read them. We're doing ourselves a great disservice intellectually.
I like how Bradbury uses aesthetics to reinforce these points. Just like word pictures separate from any argument or value judgment. So Faber at one point says, I think a good book has texture. It has pores, which is kind of a gross word picture.
Yeah.
It's asking you to imagine the weird texture of human skin as a metaphor for good literature. And then Beatty likes fire because it's nice and clean. You burn everything and you start with a nice, fresh slate. Like your brain is a blank white, pure thing with no imperfections or flaws in it. And so by giving it an aesthetic, it makes sense. People like nice, fresh, clean things. So what he's saying is one of the ways they make this work is they have people associate having no books with a nice, fresh, clean feeling. And the books give you this icky, uncomfortable feeling. He's really tapping into why reading could actually make you uncomfortable. You know, why would anybody read something that makes them sad? Or shouldn't you only want to read books that make you happy? But if it makes you sad, maybe there's something instructive in that. You're getting to live some fictional life, or maybe you're getting to see history through the eyes of someone who was there. And maybe it's messy, and maybe it's uncomfortable, or makes you feel despair. But there's got to be something valuable to knowing that if it's true, or if the story reaches. It's the Peterson thing, the Jordan Peterson thing.
Yeah.
You're going to see life through a set of fictional circumstances to kind of like think about, what would I do in this situation? And the story is a better vehicle of that than an abstract philosophical problem. Nobody likes abstract philosophical problems, because it's like, what do? Do you kill the one guy on the trolley tracks, or do you kill the 5 guys on the trolley tracks? Why can't I do something else? But if you put it in a story, people resonate with it, because they say, oh, I could be like that guy. I could be in this sort of situation. This speaks to me.
Right. Yes, that the passage you mentioned about the real literature has pores, that was actually one of the ones that stood out to me too, because it made me think about how politics is handled in a lot of popular culture today versus how political topics or potentially controversial topics were handled in earlier eras. So, we're both in the comic book community, so we have both grappled with the arguments over whether or not comics have always been political. And my answer to that question is yes, but in the sense that, yes, politics has always been addressed in comic books, and sometimes very explicitly. But in olden days, those politics were not addressed only from one side, number one, and number two, a lot of times that those politics were addressed in a way that had pores, in a way that had imperfections and complexities and nuances. Whereas today, the way politics is always handled, it's this side bad, our side good. It's all very black and white and very simplified, and there is no nuance. And it does seem to be all coming from one particular direction, instead of having many different kinds of voices adding their kind of political viewpoint to the stew. So that passage brings to my mind the fact that we're removing that in a lot of the popular culture that our two channels discuss, the pores and complexity and nuances of humanity and human feeling, and the issues that we human beings grapple with as a part of life. The way that they're being addressed in a lot of our popular media is it's removing all of the complexity from it. So you don't. So like, and nowhere is that. And if you look, for example, at the character of Carol Danvers and how she's been handled over time in Marvel canon, she's an excellent example of that, because you don't even have to go that far back. You can go back to the late 90s when she was still Miss Marvel, when she was still, she wasn't Captain Marvel yet, but she was struggling with trauma, and she was an alcoholic, and she was this very complex, very rich character, not even 20 years ago, right? But now she has to be, Miss Perfect. She's the most powerful hero in the universe. And there's nothing about her that is complex or tragic or nuanced. anymore. She's just yes, Queen Slay, generic female superhero who has every power in every power you could possibly give her in creation. So even with that one character, you can see the progression where we are removing all the complexity and nuance and humanity from the things that we are producing artistically. This is at the popular level, but it's happening all over the art world. And so when when Bradbury talks in his novel about literature in general becoming more and more bland over time, so as not to offend the dog lovers and the Presbyterians, et cetera, and so forth, that a passage like that really, really resonates right now when you're observing that exact thing happening in real time.
Because there are right-wing sensibilities you can offend, and I don't mind if art offends my right-wing sensibilities. I care if the writer is making art. I haven't read it yet. I've been reading about John Milton because I'm getting ready to read Paradise Lost. I did like a little tiny unit on it where we read a summary of it in high school, right? And then one of the interesting things about Paradise Lost is John Milton's like very like hyper religious Puritan, and he wants to write it like a Puritan, and a Puritan writes a book about Satan as the main character, right? So it's kind of like this odd thing. And then later generations interpreted Satan as a positive character, even though Milton basically explicitly said, I am writing this book to justify the ways of God to man. And he wrote such a complex character of Satan that some people said, yeah, I like this Satan guy. I agree with what Satan's saying here. He's the hero.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah, that's how you're looking at art. Which, to dial back to the popular level for a second, I think that's what makes Watchmen art too. Because, if you read interviews with Alan Moore, or if you listen to Alan Moore talk about his work, that he did not intend for Rorschach to be the hero of that series. And yet a lot of people interpreted him to be so because Alan Moore is an artist and he writes real characters with real complexities. So I 100% agree with you because The Watchmen is a good example of something that I read that offended my moral sensibilities so very much, but I respect it on such a high level because I recognize that it is, in fact, genuine art and very well put together, very well done. And I think that's what most of us want, really. Those of us who are kind of on our side of the culture war, so to speak. It's not that we want art that just propagandizes for our side. No, we just want actual genuine art that actually puts in effort to write complex, recognizably human characters, no matter what side it's supporting, so to speak, or what side it's intended to support.
Maybe one reason why like the arts gets associated with the left is this idea of not falling into a trap of just writing a straw man of your opponent or just writing yourself as the automatic hero. There's an element of that where you have to try to say, what would it be like? What would I be like if I was born in a household with completely opposite values or beliefs to my household? And if you're empathetic, you kind of are really good at putting yourself in someone else's shoes and then maybe even like beating yourself up about what you believe, but that doesn't ultimately have to change what you believe is true. You're doing it as a kind of, I don't know, either like an intellectual exercise, or if it's in the context of a story, you're doing it kind of maybe as a way of escaping into a world where you aren't exactly the way you are now. So it'd be the opposite of projecting yourself as using the protagonist as a self-insert in a story. It's more like you're taking your ideas about yourself and maybe turning them upside down or turning them on their head to see what will happen in the story world.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So maybe to bring it back to Ray Bradbury, because there's an aspect of empathizing with people unlike yourself in the arts. One of the benefits of reading is you're getting a little cliff notes on another person's soul. So you get these ideas of different kinds of souls and different kinds of belief systems, so that when you walk into your story world, you're not walking into it like a child who has no clue what these people believe. You walk into it with this understanding that people interact with the world differently than you ever have. Or even better, you find someone who interacted with the world similar to you, and you realize, oh, I'm not alone. Some people have felt this weird sense of loneliness or this weird sense of lack of fulfillment in the past. It's not unusual.
Right. And I think what Bradbury is trying to tell us is that if we bounce out of that potential to encounter another soul, because there are aspects of that soul that are uncomfortable or offensive in some way, that again, we are denying ourselves something critical to human flourishing. So he definitely has something to say to today's Puritans, so to speak, that that an offensive book should not be cleansed from existence just because you are offended by it. Maybe at that moment of offense, that might be an opportunity for you to encounter a soul that thinks differently from you, and what can you learn from that soul that might, like, even if you're very, very committed to, say, something like racial justice, how can you possibly advance the cause of racial justice if you don't understand how racists actually think? That's something that's always got me. Like, if you are genuinely concerned with persuading people who have racist beliefs to not have those beliefs, shouldn't you understand on a fundamental level why they have those beliefs to begin with? And how can you possibly understand why they have those beliefs if you won't actually let them talk to you about those beliefs?
But I think a cynical person moves beyond persuading someone to basically despairing and saying, well, I can't persuade anyone, therefore I'll just defeat them.
Well, yes, obviously that's what a lot of people have moved on to. But I always when I write my blogs, or I talk about the more mundane world of political issues and stuff like that, I always try to write to the middle, to the person who's like sitting on the fence and thinking about like which side to fall, essentially. And I'll say, listen, this side, this side has a point about, say, racial disparities, but let me talk to you about why, like, their approach to it or their theory about why it exists is incorrect and therefore detrimental. So like I'm trying to say, okay, there's this concern, I think it's a genuine concern, but here's the actual humane way to approach that genuine concern, as opposed to the way of just defeating the opponent instead of actually maybe converting the opponent instead. Maybe like as a Christian, I just have this, this naturally evangelical nature where I don't want to just crush people under my boots. I want to persuade,
well, it's something I think that separates us from like the new postmodern right, where this postmodern right is arguing, well, they're operating under postmodern assumptions, so we're fools if we pretend that they are willing to dialogue. Like, this was a theme when we talked about Heroes of the Fourth Turning, is does the fact that the left is becoming postmodern push us into a position where we have to become more postmodern. And I keep coming back to be as innocent as doves, but as shrewd as snakes, where it's actually helpful to be able to think like a postmodernist because you get it. You get the internal logic of it, but you don't have to become black-pilled. Yeah.
Yeah. Logic, or as James Lindsay calls it, paralogic. It's not real logic, but it's a kind of logic. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, and I think they have a point in the sense that the postmodern right has a point in the sense that I'm not going to argue with just anybody. Right. Like when I write my blog posts, it's I'm not in the middle of an argument. This is just me presenting my thoughts on a particular subject. So I deliberately write my blogs to the middle. Right. But, you know, if I'm in an argument with someone, I'm not going to continue an argument with someone who is using postmodern tactics against me, because for me, it's like, so if someone is using the postmodern tactics against me, I will say, oh, well, clearly you're not really interested in having a real argument, so I shall walk away from this confrontation.
Right.
I will turn the other cheek, so to speak, and walk away. Yeah, yeah. So, like, they have a point in that there's no, the postmodern right has a point in that there's no point in actually engaging with a genuine postmodern leftist. Like, because the whole point of postmodern leftism is that there is no argument, right?
I'm smarter than you.
Yeah. It is about browbeating you into submission, and no one should actually subject themselves to that. And I certainly won't do that. But you know, there's also a significant contingent of people who are just kind of going along with the stream of this because they haven't yet perceived what's actually going on, in my opinion. So these are the people that think that diversity training in the critical race theory mode is just benign diversity training. And these people, they just don't understand what is actually being taught in these workshops, and they need to be informed. So that's the kind of people that I target my writing to. Is, look, you know, because those people, I think, are persuadable if they actually knew exactly what was going on with that kind of nonsense. That they would be turned away from it. You know.
I'm trying to connect something with Fahrenheit 451, where he is talking about political correctness before political correctness emerged, but he's not associating political correctness with either a left or a right-wing ideology. He's sort of looking at political correctness all by itself. Like, you could imagine a right-wing government establishing something like Fahrenheit 451. You could imagine a left-wing government establishing something like Fahrenheit 451. The only way it could happen is if political correctness became something that was sort of universally accepted first. So maybe like one hopeful thing is sometimes I will see people who are on the left talk about political correctness as a phenomenon in the left that they hate. And then they'll go vote Joe Biden, or they'll vote Andrew Yang or Tulsi Gabbard or something. It's sort of like they don't know. They see it rising within their own ranks, and it bugs them. They just don't know what to do about it. Yeah. So I don't know if the internet has created an opportunity for you to be silenced. There's still a lot of opportunities to use the technology for good. You know, Faber and Montag use a radio to communicate and help them get out of Dodge. So if the technology is neutral, there are opportunities for you to use the technology for good, even if they're like really evil uses of the technology that we're worried will become worse and worse in the future.
Yes, and you know, as you pointed out, you do have that passage in which Faber says, you know, it's not the medium, it's not the medium of the book that is the magical talisman that will get us out of this morass that we're in. It is the content of the medium. So
that connects. I bet you that was purposeful on Bradbury's part. So there's this kind of postmodern idea that the media is the message, that if you control the media or the type of media is actually more important than whatever the content is it itself. So I'll have to dig it up, but there is an idea that the form the story takes is more important than the content of the story itself. So see, I think Bradbury would probably disagree and say that kind of like the human dimension of it or the eternal dimension of it is more important than kind of like the nuts and bolts of, you know, is it on film or is it on photography or is it words on a page?
Right. Well, there are art movements. Again, this is me with my kind of layman's understanding of art history. There were art movements that focused on form exclusive of content. Am I correct about that?
Yes. Yeah, that sounds like like modernist, you know, kind of like what if we minimalists? What if we reduce the human figure just to a simple shape that evokes the idea of a person without actually being modeled after a person? Yeah. And, you know, it's a principle of art. So, you know, I wouldn't say that the medium is unimportant. The medium always is going to dictate how you approach the subject. Yeah. Like having a visual medium changes what you can do for your story. Novels are really good at the written word. So not even comics can live up to novels when it comes to using the pure written word to express something with just words. So medium matters. I just don't think that medium overtakes. I guess it's almost spiritual. If you're just a materialist, then everything is reduced to kind of like these, I don't know, atomistic qualities of like what objective properties does this medium have versus this medium. But if there's a spiritual dimension to art, then that human spiritual dimension can't be reduced to just a social factor. The you exists, and the you isn't just created randomly by a bunch of material circumstances outside of yourself. There is such a thing as a you.
Correct. Yeah. Now I was just thinking now of another thing in the novel that kind of smacked me in a particular way. And at one point in the novel, there's a mention of people being stuffed with information, like trivia, so that they could win at trivia games, and thus they consider themselves educated. And that smacked me in a particular way as someone who's who is in some sense involved with the education system in this country, in that that is in fact one of the central problems with education, at least here in the United States, is that you have two choices. It seems you're either shoving people full of extraneous trivial information, like a lot of bad history classes are taught. Like bad history classes, it's all about the facts and figures and dates and so on. Or you get utterly contentless classes where we're not going to teach you the facts and figures and dates. We're just going to, go loosey-goosey and do whatever the heck we feel like, right? And there's no concept of there must be information, but the information must be attached to some overarching narrative or goal in what you're doing. So that smacked me a little bit as someone who teaches, that yes, like information without context is that we essentially live in a world right now that is awash in information, right? You can hop onto Google and find whatever information you want, but that doesn't mean that anyone knows how to think critically with that information. So there has to be like some connecting schema to put all of the information together into something that makes sense. So it's interesting that he kind of perceived that as well, before Like he was writing this in 1953, so we were just on the cusp of a mass media society, but he could already see that in the presence of mass media, that people were going to be essentially overwhelmed with information. But what the heck do you do with it if you're not taught how to handle and assimilate information?
And if you can't trust the news, then you don't know what's true anymore. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing that kind of stands out in today's context is the fact that throughout the whole novel, there's hints that there is a war coming, and basically no one cares.
Right.
Because they're being distracted by the mass media of their world, right? So everyone is being directed to look at the squirrel, right? While nuclear war is essentially hours away, right? Everyone is focused on
everything is about appearance.
On their television wall. Yeah, exactly. So that is in fact very relevant to today's society, where we, like, I really feel that the cabal of the Time magazine article is training all of us to look at what color is the dress, so we don't notice how they are manipulating all of our lives.
Right.
And I really, like, I don't want to get all tinfoil hat about everything, but when they actually, like, come out in the open and say in the pages of Time magazine that this is what they're doing, and when they actually come out and say that, we're looking to accomplish the Great Reset, how can you not get a little bit paranoid about how can you not get a little bit paranoid about what it is they're trying to do with all of us? And
there's so much. The media elites, the media and our intellectual elites behave so badly that it starts to drive people nuts. So that if the elites say something true, then it would actually be important for people to trust them and listen to what they have to say. But they've wasted their trust. If you appeal to your expertise and your authority, you're spending some of your credibility on that. But that means if you screw it up, then it's going to become harder and harder and harder for people to trust you the next time. So we have a trust crisis that is affecting us as a culture. So, and I don't know if there's any easy solution to it. Maybe there's hope in access to information, letting people find good information and good intellectuals and good elites if they can't trust the sort of standard cultural elites. But there's no easy solution to the problem of human nature, basically.
And it's especially difficult when the bad elites have as much power as they do to shut off certain spigots of information, and because they have been declared misinformation by people whose authority to do so is questionable at absolute best. I'm sorry if you are one of the people who was saying, just for example, 15 days to stop the spread has turned into 330 days to do so. But it's okay for Black Lives Matter to have their giant rallies where everyone is standing cheek by jowl, and many of them are unmasked. That's fine, because they're fighting against racism, which is another important public health issue. If you're one of those people who was, apologizing for Black Lives Matter rallies while shutting restaurants down, you no longer have any authority, as far as I'm concerned, to declare what is or is not misinformation when it comes to COVID-19. I'm sorry. Sorry. That is the position that I'm in. Like, so where is the good information? Well, sorry, it's very hard to get it, because some very powerful people in Silicon Valley have decided that that this particular one side of seeing things is the correct information. We have declared it so. Everything else is misinformation. So we're going to try to erase it from our platform, or at least obnoxiously flag it as quote unquote misinformation. When it's like, who are you, Jack Dorsey, to tell me what is or is not misinformation? Are you a doctor? Are you an immunologist? No, you are not. So shut the hell up. Like, right. Sorry, I'm veering off into this rant, but but yeah, so to steer it back to the actual topic of the stream here, but I think like Bradbury is seeing how mass media could be used as a massive distraction tool to keep the entire populace occupied with something that doesn't matter, while things that do matter are happening basically right under their nose. Like, did you know there was a coup in Myanmar? Like, I mean, I know because I'm watching some reputable news sources, right? Yeah. But how many people, how many regular Americans are actually aware that that's going on, right?
Yeah. And there's an America focus in, maybe because we're such a big country and we have so many states that a lot of things are going on here, but we generally don't care about whole countries overseas going collapsing or whatever, because we're I don't know, maybe we should get back to the point where we start seeing our state as our country, but we need to have a smaller federal government for that to work. For basically, if the federal government decides everything for everybody, then it becomes more and more important to pay attention to all these states, because they all have more and more of an impact on our lives. So we kind of we have to care about them now.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, you know, those of us who are of the small government leanings, like I always retweet, because I follow a lot of people who are small government minded. I always retweet every time they say, you know, we probably wouldn't be so exercised about federal politics if the federal government were smaller and the states were a little more independent and could do what they wanted. I always retweet that, because it's like, it's true. Because I am perfectly, one of my consistent political beliefs has always been that I am perfectly happy to allow San Francisco to be as San Francisco-y as it wants to be, so long as, you know, umpty squat North Carolina is allowed to be whatever it wants to be, right? I'm very big on the kind of localism, letting it, you know, if a particular town does not want a Walmart in it, then yeah, that's the choice of that particular town. I respect that. You know, it's but of course, no, we can't have nice things like that. Everybody has to want to control everybody else. That's another one of my consistent political beliefs is I don't like being controlled, you know? So, and I don't like it when other people are being controlled either. So, yeah. But yeah, so we have, this is all coming from our discussion of the fact that our popular media and our social media are basically causing us to cast our focus on things that matter less than the things we really should be focusing on. Like like the identity politics, I honestly think the identity politics is a way for the elites to keep us all fighting amongst ourselves so we don't notice how badly the elites are acting. And I think it's also a way to, it's also a way for the elites to basically pull up the ladder behind them so that none of us can actually get to their level.
Yeah, you can't have the wage slaves organizing if the wage slaves are divided along racial lines.
Yeah, well, you know, as soon as the wage
that guy Stone Toss illustrates this, where he's basically like, he does kind of like the cryptic, you know, like 4chan, you know, nudge, wink, 4chan wink,
kind of things. And I always retweet those because they're funny. Yeah, yeah.
A lot of times, like, communists will retweet him because sometimes what he says overlaps with what they're trying to say about capitalism. He's got that famous one where it's like a super libertarian and a Nazi in a tug of war with a rich capitalist and anti.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, and somebody on my list said, I keep thinking about the Stonecast comic, and it was that one. I was like, yes. But wasn't it that he was also the one that did the, I'm really concerned about the working man, and then the actual like working man with the pickup truck shows up, and then he's like, ew, I don't want to shake hands with you. Like, right. Yeah, right. I think that was a Stonecast comic too. Yeah,
his humor is able to resonate because he sort of gets the subtext logic well enough that he can start predicting things. That a lot of 4chan gags rely on this. They rely on the fact that you can predict how a certain person thinks. If they have predictable thought patterns and you can predict it, then you can start to tell jokes that rely on predicting how they're gonna react.
Right. And and that's not just a now thing, though. I mean, Orwell observed that in the kind of communist sympathetic left as well, that like a big portion of George Orwell's writing was basically making the observation that a lot of people who considered themselves socialist really had zero concern for the working man whatsoever, so that's actually been a consistent feature of the hard left, and not necessarily a bug, which it kind of strengthens my case that it is a matter of certain well-positioned elites pulling up the ladder behind them so that the wage slaves can't come after them. Because in mid-century, right around the time that Bradbury was writing Fahrenheit 451, there was a big renaissance in the reading of high literature, because the paperback book had made that suddenly accessible to the popular audience. So this is something I've actually read about, so I know a little bit about it. So in the immediate post-World War II era, in which Fahrenheit 451 was written, a lot of wage slaves were in fact picking up high literature and reading it, and they were very very interested in discussing it, and they were having like book clubs and intellectual salons in their American Legion halls and stuff like that. And what happened among the intellectual class when that started happening? Suddenly it was all about camp and elevating the low, because the dirty proles are getting into the stuff that used to be just for us. So now we have to turn 180 and find something else that the dirty proles can't access. Yeah. So there was once us dirty proles started accessing the literature that used to be just the purview of the elites got very, very uncomfortable with that. So I think there's a lot of that going on today. So they're encouraging all of us to fight amongst ourselves, so we don't actually do the things that would allow us to ascend to their level in terms of their success.
A lot of the like the 1950s was basically a time where the American middle class and American rural people started developing, theaters and things like that. Fantastic. So are there any other books by Ray Bradbury you'd recommend?
The interesting thing about Ray Bradbury is he was mostly a short story writer. Yeah. So what I would say is just pick up a collection of his short stories, I think, because he's actually one of the greatest short story writers that America has ever had. So that's what I would suggest is just look at his shorter works, because he's one of those writers who has mastered the form. I actually own, which means it exists. I actually own one that's like the complete short works of Ray Bradbury. So I think it exists somewhere.
Nice.
You just have to look for it.
Gotta go find it.
I don't know if it's still. Yeah, go find it. Otherwise there are the collections, like the Martian Chronicles is in fact a collection of short stories that just have as the unifying theme that it's, Mars. But so you can do that. You can find that too. If you can't find, the complete works or a larger collection, that's always a possibility as well.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Well, I think the only thing I've read by him is Fahrenheit 451, and this kind of like reminded me that I want to go check out some of his alternate work and short stories. So this was a lot of fun. It's definitely the most hopeful of the dystopias. Montag. I mean, it's somber, like a lot of people die, but there's hope that Montag is going to be able to contribute in a restoration of literature and preserving these books for people. So it's nice to have one that isn't absolutely dreary and like the world is doomed as some of the other famous dystopias are.
Right. So we're leading with this one, and the next time we come back to the dystopia series, we will probably be covering Brave New World, I think, is the next one I would like to do. So expect a stream sometime soon on Brave New World. We're also going to be doing a stream on this channel on Iron Man #6, obviously, since I've been doing streams every time another Iron Man comes out. So that will be coming up as well. And
bada bing, bada
boom. Bada bing. Do you want to advertise anything?
I just have my art videos coming out right now. I think like today is Bleep Post Saturday, so I have some memes coming out today. So just like an unusual mix. I've got some fairy tale videos that. I found out like some 8th graders were assigned one of my fairy tale videos as a homework assignment. So that was kind of like an exciting little thing for me. So hopefully some more fairy tales are coming soon. That kind of stuff. Yeah.
And again, I have all of your deets in the description of this video, so anyone can check out your webtoons. They can check out your Subscribestar and your channel, which features video games, comic reviews, and quality bleep posts for your enjoyment. So thank you, #1 Marmaduke fan, for joining me for the stream on Fahrenheit 451.
And thank you for having me. Look forward to discussing Iron Man soon.
I look forward to it as well. And for those of you who will be watching this later, I hope you enjoyed this the stream, and I will be signing out. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.